When you're puffy and holding water, it's one of the most frustrating things because you don't always know what's causing it. And there's so many different variables. You could eat the perfect diet one day and the next morning wake up holding a ton of water in your face, feeling like you can't see any muscle definition, all just because you have water retention. And it is absolutely dumbfounding because you don't know what is triggering it. And the truth is, this would be a 6-hour video if I went through every single reason that you could be holding water. But I wanted to focus on what I think are the big three and the simplest ones that you could probably make alterations and actually have some fixes for. So let's go ahead and let's dive in. Hey, I do want to ask you please do hit that red subscribe button and then hit the bell icon and select all notifications. We post videos every single day and I never want you to miss a beat. All kinds of amazing, cool content coming your way all the time. Also, after this video, check out Thrive Market down below in the description. They are super awesome. I've been able to create hormone optimization bundles, fasting bundles, keto bundles, all different grocery bundles. So you can check out what Thomas would get at the grocery store and get it delivered right to your doorstep. So make sure you check them out after you watch this video in the description. First one we need to talk about is seemingly obvious, but it's a little bit of the opposite of what the obvious one is. That is making sure your potassium is truly in play. Make sure you're getting enough potassium because everyone focuses on sodium. What's the first thing that people focus on if they feel like they're puffy? Oh, I probably had too much sodium. I need to reduce that. That's not the answer, okay? Sodium and potassium work together. And if you end up taking out the sodium out of your equation, what's going to happen is your body is going to recognize that and it's going to go into a potential panic, and therefore it's going to hold on to more water to try to hold on to more sodium. Okay, now at first you might drop some water, you might lose some puffiness if you drop the sodium, but eventually it's going to cause a bigger issue. You don't necessarily want to fight it by just cutting out sodium. You see, sodium and potassium work together. Potassium holds the water inside the cell and sodium helps it stay out. Okay, so we got extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid. The goal is the balance of osmolality, right? We want the balance of that water there. But whenever you're out of balance, too little potassium, too much potassium, too little sodium, too much sodium, whatever, that's when things get out of whack. As soon as your body notices that you're deficient in, let's say, sodium, it's going to start pulling in some drastic measures. But additionally, if you have too much sodium, then your body is going to hold on to it for a little bit, but then it's going to try to excrete it. And whenever you excrete anything, you're going to lose potassium too. So if your body's trying to flush out sodium, you're also losing potassium. So it doesn't do you any good to just cut out the sodium. Point is here, every time you consume sodium, you need to be making a concerted effort to also consume potassium. Here's the problem. This day and age, we just don't get good amounts of natural potassium coming in. Even 15, 20 years ago, we did. But so many things are processed and so many things go through so many different just channels now that we actually lose the natural potassium. So much of our food is depleted in the potassium and magnesium levels. But sodium's easy, right? We get sodium everywhere. So we're constantly in this chronic out of balance state. So if you add sodium in, even taking a 99 milligram simple potassium tab every time you feel like you're having a little bit more sodium, it will help you out in the long run, at least so you don't have big, massive undulations. Because that is what wreaks havoc on us, is when we go up and down in terms of water retention. I'm okay with having a half-pound fluctuation, but when I wake up and I have a 7-pound fluctuation and I know I didn't gain 7 pounds of fat in one day, that can be a little bit irritating. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is an interesting one. It's called carbohydrate contrast. Okay, it's not just having carbohydrates or not, it's how many carbohydrates are you having relative to your baseline level of carbohydrates. You see, here's what happens. Our kidneys do receive a message from insulin. When our insulin levels are high, our kidneys actually signal to hold on to some water. When our insulin levels are low, our kidneys actually signal to expel water. So that is why so many people that are on low carb diets drop so much water weight so fast. Their insulin levels become very, very low and their kidneys continue to expel lots of water. Now the caveat to this is that your body's just going to find a balance with wherever its homeostasis is. If you are someone that consistently consumes a bunch of carbohydrates, your insulin levels might be moderately high, but your body is going to adapt to that. That is going to become the norm. So what I mean by carbohydrate contrast is this. Anytime you have a spike in carbohydrates that is, I'd say 15 or 20% more than what you normally would have, it's going to signal the kidneys to hold on to water. Simple point. If you are doing a low carb diet, maybe you're consuming 50 grams of carbohydrates normally in the day. That's just hypothetical. And then all of a sudden you start having 60 or 70. Well, that's going to cause more of an insulin spike. And it doesn't take much for your body to say, uh-oh, that's a pretty sharp contrast for me to start holding on to water. Now, on the other hand, if you're someone that consumes 500 carbohydrates a day, well, to have a 5 or 10% difference, you're looking more like 50 grams of carbohydrates, which is like a whole separate meal, right? So you can see how once you start having a bunch of carbohydrates, the water retention is different. It's triggered by different things. However, again, you have to remember, if you have insulin factoring in how much water you're holding on to, well, doesn't that mean that any minerals you take in are going to get held on to too? So people that have higher carbohydrate diets, their issue is more likely to be coming from the minerals, whereas someone that typically eats a low carb diet, their issue is more likely to be caused by the carbohydrates because minerals are already just leaving their body. And whatever minerals you do take in are probably going to have a relatively minuscule effect in terms of water retention. Anyhow, the next one that we have to talk about is one that's very, 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 very important, and that is the hormonal piece, particularly estrogen for men and women. And believe it or not, it sounds like, based upon the research, like we have two different scenarios. Estrogen could be better for women and worse for men. So here's what happens. We have a couple of different hormones. Our kidneys respond to hormones known as ADH and also one known as aldosterone. Now, it's the job of both of these hormones to ultimately tell our body what to hold on to in terms of water and what to excrete. And there's a complicated system that's related with cortisol, stress, sugar, all this other stuff we don't need to worry about on this video, but these hormones are important. So let's talk about how estrogen comes into play with these hormones, okay? Because if estrogen sends a signal to store or hold or release water, then we know that we can kind of control it at a higher level. Okay, so the American Journal of Physiology, Renal Physiology Department published a study. This is pretty interesting. They took a look at rats and they removed these rats' ovaries, okay? And they found that when they removed the rats' ovaries, that their levels of something known as aquaporin changed. They found that this aquaporin protein increased. Now, aquaporin triggers the body to hold on to water. Okay, so that's a simple protein that actually signals whether, okay, when you've reached the fork in the road, do you go to the bladder and go pee, or do you go back into the interstitial space? What's the deal? So what that basically was meaning was that when there was less estrogen and more AQP, they were holding on to more water. Okay, so when you first look at this, you say, well, wait a minute, this is a little bit backwards from what I would have thought. If I have more estrogen, then I'd be maintaining water, but if I actually lower my estrogen, like you did in these rats, then I hold water? I would think that estrogen would make me hold water, but in this study it looks like it's the opposite, right? Less estrogen equaled more AQP, which means less estrogen equaled more water retention. So they took it a step further and they gave these rats a dose of estrogen, of estradiol, and they found when they gave them estradiol, they had less AQP and they started to actually lose water. So when they had estrogen, they were dropping water. What the heck? Okay, so it's the opposite of what we would think. We would think in women that if you had more estrogen, you'd be puffier. Well, maybe that is still the case. This study didn't measure water retention. It measured AQP. It measured how much the body was trying to lose water, right? Trying to expel. Well, think about this. You have to factor in what happens when your body expels water. You're expelling minerals, right? Which means that therefore you become potassium deficient, which means therefore you're holding water, right? In other ways. So what I'm saying here is that estrogen, although it may be signaling women to actually lose water, it could be making you puffy because it's making you minerally imbalanced. That is somewhat of my hypothesis because there isn't any research out there to show that, probably because no one's been weird enough to be interested, but I'm interested and I kind of think you're interested, so maybe we're all weird together. But let's talk about men for a second, okay? There's a study that was published in Neuropharmacology that found that testosterone increased vasopressin levels, which means that testosterone potentially made it so that we were holding more water as men. Well, what does this mean for us as guys, right? Well, it means for whatever reason, we're having this transcellular water being reabsorbed whenever we have testosterone levels higher. Don't really know why. I'm sure some scientists do. But the point is that what is causing it? Is it the testosterone that's causing the increase in vasopressin that's making us hold water? Or is it the relationship between testosterone and estrogen? Because when testosterone levels are higher, estrogen levels are higher in men, which means that estrogen levels could be the culprit too. We don't really know. They didn't do any independent testing to see if it's testosterone or estrogen triggering the increase in vasopressin. And there is a natural correlation that goes with the two. The short answer here is this. You don't want to have any major fluctuations. Balance is the key. The second that you have too much estrogen, something's going to happen. You're going to excrete water and then have a mineral corticoid bloat, okay? The other way around, also true. If you can keep these fluctuations under control, then you're going to be a lot better off. Now, I don't mean to pick on women for a second, but obviously when you go through a menstrual cycle, you know that you have fluctuations and changes in your water rate, right? It's always talked about. Okay, if you're a week before your cycle, you might start to see more water retention and puffiness. It is totally normal, but how come nobody talks about the root cause of this? Okay, so how do you control your estrogen levels? Well, there's multiple ways. I usually say whatever you do, you stay consistent with it, okay? So diindole methane, taking DIM supplements, is one way to do it. Okay, another way to do it is definitely control the use of like receipt paper. Like I usually tell the cashier to not even hand me the receipt paper. I usually say, just toss it, I don't need it. Because that receipt paper is toxic stuff full of xenoestrogens, estrogens that are going to cause issues in your body because they're going to emulate estrogens in your body. Point is, we need to control that. But additionally, lessen the exposure to soy products, things like that. Okay? Keep your minerals balanced so that your body can actually bounce back from these things. But anyhow, when it comes down to these three things, the end all be all with these in terms of the tips, potassium, okay, along with sodium meals. Okay, with the carbohydrates, monitor the spikes of carbohydrates that you have. And then of course, thirdly, balance your estrogen levels for men and women. As always, please do keep it locked in here on my channel. Don't forget to hit that red subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the bell icon, and I'll see you in the next video.